The typical model for engagement is more around time and materials, and quite a traditional model. It's a way that people are used to paying for services. But I wanted to sort of think, well, it would be really beneficial to have a proposition whereby I could offer a more defined outcome and output for a project. But the philosophy really is to almost democratise the world of freelance working, consulting from the independent side, and to really open up and enable the workforce across the UK in over the next sort of 5, 6, 7 years. Because of the situation that linked to COVID-19, I think it's forcing people to work more remotely, and therefore one of the things that I hope will happen as a result of that is there's a shift in terms of how people want to work, but also a shift in terms of how businesses require their people to work in terms of where they expect them to be. Presenteeism has not been proven to be anything else other than a negative influence, really. So, but actually, a lot of people are judged on whether or not they're there at 8 o'clock in the morning until 6 o'clock in the night. We know we've got a climate emergency. If we can convince people to convince business and indeed people that they don't need to travel into an office, every single day at the same time as much, then surely there's got to be benefits for that. Often one of the big problems that businesses have is people generate work where work's not needed because they fill time. That generates work for a whole bunch of other people and generate, this multiplication effect, which actually then leads to, yes, there's an awful lot of people doing a lot of stuff, but it's quite low in terms of productivity because it's not targeted, it's not focused. And generally speaking, that then leads people to a point when they get frustrated because things that they're working on don't see the light of day. My feeling around it is that there's a way to change the way people look at work and to change the way people engage with work, to give people more freedom, more empowerment, more flexibility.
On this episode of the Pocket Mastermind podcast, we're speaking to Danny Dixon. Dan is the founder of a startup freelance employment platform called Portevo. We discuss how the time has come to evolve the way we work by moving away from Victorian Monday to Friday 9 to 5 model and a culture of presenteeism to embrace ways of working more suitable for a digital age. With the technology available to us, do we really need to be commuting for multiple hours per day? And should where you live or whether you have family commitments dictate the opportunities available to you? Listen to how Danny and Portevo are working to change the status quo over the coming years. If you'd like to find out more about Danny and Portevo, head over to Portevo.work. Welcome, Danny, to the Pocket Mastermind podcast. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Yeah.
So you've just started a project called Portevo. Can you tell us a bit about what Portevo is, what the starting point of that has been, and what you're hoping to achieve with the project?
Yeah, so I think I spent 25 years or so working in industry for sort of large businesses, more latterly 3, the mobile company. And over that time, I spent a lot of time, working, with internal people, with, part in terms of agencies or consultancies, with, some of the big players as well. And, I saw variable results from that, some really good results, some not so good results. And then when I had the opportunity to move on from 3, and I decided that after, the time that I'd been there, that was the right time to do it. I thought actually it would be quite good to become an independent consultant, I suppose. And I don't particularly like the word consultant because it elicits different responses from people. But a sort of independent freelance worker that could use the 25 years of experience that I had to provide value to businesses across different sort of parts of the business spectrum. And then I started to think, well, okay, wouldn't it be great if I could build we hear about associate networks, build an associate network of like-minded individuals. And I thought, well, actually, if I was going to do that, what would be my point of difference to some of the existing ones that are out there? And one of the things that I've seen over the time when I've been working with, as I said, the various, consultancies, agencies, other forms of partners in that sense, is the typical model for engagement is more around time and materials. And, quite a traditional model. It's a way that people are used to paying for services. But I wanted to sort of think, well, it would be really beneficial to have a proposition whereby I could offer a more defined outcome and output for a project, and focus in on defining what was involved within that, within getting to that output and outcome, and then potentially even work on a fixed price basis. So start to offer a sort of more productize what would typically be a consultant service. So spend a bit more time up front, this idea of slowing down to speed up in the long run, define it, agree that with the client, and then engage on the project and deliver it. So then I started to think, well, okay, if I maybe I could get, I don't know, 20, 30, 50 people size associate network, it could be relatively successful. But I over the Christmas time, I was doing a bit of thinking in the time that we had off. And I got to the 6th of January, and I sat down with a pad and a pen, and I started writing down how, using a mobile device, how could we connect, the different facets of an individual's profile to a whole range of different types of work engagement. So I started to think, okay, well, if I wanted to scale up this model to be something that was much bigger than 30, 40, 50, 60 people, what would be the right way to do that? So I started to think more in the context of creating a much more scalable digital platform that would be based on the concept of engaging people for clean lined statements of work, statements of work. We'll probably give it a different name in time, and then connecting people with those statements of work, freelance people, so they can connect directly with clients who have those statements of work and those needs, and doing that over a digital platform, and then trying to do that at scale. So it sort of evolved, if you like, from the 6th of Jan, and over the last 2 months, it started to evolve into something a bit more significant. Still very early on in the process, but the philosophy really is to almost democratize the world of freelance working, consulting from the independent side, and to really open up and enable the workforce across the UK in over the next sort of 5, 6, 7 years.
And are there any particular sectors that you'd want to be targeting initially? Do you see a natural fit in certain skill sets?
I think it's when we look at it over the types of focus areas we've got at the moment, it's my background is in the area of customer experience. It's in product development, proposition development, transformational change, customer value creation, sort of those types of areas. So the people that I'm initially working with are focused within that area. But so that's going to be our starting point. But the idea is when we build a piece of technology that can then facilitate this interaction between the client and the associate consultant or the freelance person, the idea would be we build that in such a way that it can be quite agnostic to the piece of work in question or the client. So, but I mean, typically the focus will be on more professional sort of freelance type activity initially, and it's not aimed to be or intended to be the Fiverr end of the ecosystem. It's sort of intended to be chunkier pieces of work that a company can buy on a work package type basis.
And do you see do you see a role for maybe small organizations, small businesses to be able to effectively pitch for statements of work within that? So the individuals, maybe one or two people in a business, like a small digital marketing agency, for example, something like that. Do you see them interacting with your service? Is that, or is it purely individual?
No, I see I see the ability for small to medium enterprises to be able to, or even smaller businesses to be able to access. Because if you think about it, there's often a cost barrier that some of these businesses have to be able to engage with some of the larger consultancy organizations and other forms of agency. And sometimes even with the what you call the contingent labor market, so the sort of contract type resource. If we're able to work package down professional services, potentially into smaller bite-sized engagements, then that opens up that market opportunity for small businesses as well. So if I'm a small business with a relatively small budget, I'm able to access people who've worked, who've got a sort of broad range of experience, but might just be a short-term engagement, and therefore I can access them. So it opens up the whole landscape from a buy side as well as a supply side as well.
Sounds really interesting. What I guess that one of the challenges has been historically getting people to buy into this remote working, and obviously where we find ourselves now with enforced remote working, it could be a good catalyst for that. Have you thought about what the potential benefits of this enforced change might mean for the project?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's one of those scenarios where it's the current situation we find ourselves in, and I guess we're all struggling to adjust to that, is one that is forcing us to work in a much more sort of remote manner. If you think about the context, before all of this, is people cramming themselves into their cars on trains. Trains are packed during the rush hour windows, either at the start of the day, end of the day. At the moment, all of that situation has had to stop because of the situation linked to COVID-19. I think it's forcing people to work more remotely, and therefore one of the things that I hope will happen as a result of that is there's a shift in terms of how people want to work, but also a shift in terms of how businesses require their people to work, in terms of where they expect them to be. Because I think it's unfortunate that a lot of success at an individual level in corporate enterprise or even in smaller businesses generally based on how many hours you spend in the office.
Yeah.
Presenteeism has not been proven to be anything else other than a negative influence, really. So, but actually, a lot of people are judged on whether or not they're there at 8 o'clock in the morning until 6 o'clock in the night. Whereas actually, if you're able to say, look, this is the thing that I want doing, you don't really need to be here, 5 days a week. I'd like to see you 1 day a week or whatever it is. That's fine. But actually, you do it much more flexibly. Then I think the current situation that we have will encourage people to think more and more like that, and be able to work much more flexibly, much more remotely. Which, if there can be any positive that comes out of this, that I think is one of them.
Yeah.
And just to build on that, we know we've got a climate emergency. If we can convince people to convince business and indeed people that they don't need to travel into an office, every single day at the same time as much, then surely there's got to be benefits for that as well.
Yeah, definitely. I think I think we talked about this previously. The presenteeism is a massive challenge, I think, and I think if a couple of things that could change, with a statement of works or a process by which you're proposing, I think is great. And I think also linked to that is really being paid for the outcome rather than the process as such. And I think at the moment, because of these days everything is based on a fixed salary effectively, regardless of how many hours you're there. Companies are quite happy for people to work really long days, not get much rest, and I think that would change if they were paying for a specific statement of works or for a time period. If everyone was on hourly wage, I bet you wouldn't see many people in the office at 8 o'clock in the evening, because the business couldn't afford to sustain that, right? So,
well, yeah, that's right. And the other thing is, if you've got a lot of experience within, the sort of service corporate sector and things like that. And often one of the big problems that businesses have is people generate work where work's not needed, because they fill time. That generates work for a whole bunch of other people, and there's this multiplication effect, which actually then leads to, yes, there's an awful lot of people doing a lot of stuff, but it's quite low in terms of productivity because it's not targeted, it's not focused. Whereas people can, and generally speaking, that then leads people to a point when they get frustrated because they can't, the things that they're working on don't see the light of day. Opportunity for businesses to be focused more on, the things that matter, the things that are going to add value to the business. It takes a different type of leadership.
Yeah.
I think. But it's, and it requires people to better define what they want to do up front. But I think the gains in the long term and the saving, I think, would be significant for business over time.
And what do you think needs to change from a leadership perspective for this to be adopted?
I think it requires leaders to simply be more clear on what they want out of something, and I think we've seen over time, we've seen leaders be sort of more resource managers and actually not necessarily always undertaking the leadership obligation, which is to set the direction of travel, to define their element of the strategy, or the strategy depending on where they sit in the business, to provide that guidance and the right level of prioritization, people within the team, and then importantly enable people to do that. So not be the person that's got to be all seeing and all knowing all the time, but actually then bring the team up around them to be able to be successful. And I think I think a lot of leaders these days don't really do that very well. I don't think there's it's sort of get into something and then muddle their way through it to the point that they might get to the outcome. Whereas actually, if leaders had to spend more time thinking about the direction that they were going in, thinking about what the priorities were, defining what they wanted in terms of outcomes and outputs, then in time, again, as I used the expression earlier on, you slow down to speed up. Yes, getting started might take you a little bit longer, but getting to the solution becomes much quicker in the long run.
Well, I think you end up saving a fair amount of time as a result of that. I think you and I have both been part of projects where they probably got started a bit too quick. A deadline was put in place that was probably never realistic, and as a result, the deadline wasn't achieved, and the project ended up running on probably 3 times longer than it otherwise would have done had the due diligence been done up front, rather than trying to rush it through and then falling over multiple challenges along the way.
I was involved in one thing in the past myself, where the biggest driver at one particular point was just to deliver something in inverted commas. Now, it wasn't quite as black as that, but it was there was an awful lot of rushing to be able to prove that we could do something. We spent an awful long time after that, trying to verify what the actual proposition was for the customer, and because we couldn't clearly that wasn't clearly as understood as we wanted to be. We ended up losing a lot of time because we had to then reinvent it later on. So it feels good to be able to get something out quickly. But it isn't always the best thing if that idea was ill-conceived to start off with.
And the other thing I think potentially, it's probably going slightly off topic, but I think the other part of leadership is probably this level of detachment from the outcome that I've definitely seen. And so I think there's so many layers removed quite often, particularly within large organisations, that they don't necessarily know what is happening, whether it's something is being delivered and whether something else could have been achieved. The message goes up all the time, we've done everything we possibly can, and I've definitely seen that that isn't always the case. I've viewed and thought, had seen the messages that went from what actually happened, and then the message that made its way further up the chain don't necessarily give the decision makers the right information to be able to make effective decisions. And I think unless the leadership are willing to then not just purely rely on the information they're provided, but go out and check and look for themselves and really understand. And I think that's where you see some of the key leaders, people like Jeff Bezos, for example. He knows the Amazon business inside out from the top to the bottom, and that's why they're so incredibly successable. I don't see that being replicated quite a lot in a lot of businesses, and maybe that's an opportunity to change, and maybe that will change by moving more to a statement of works, because people become more accountable purely for that outcome rather than
for the outcome. That's right. I think and you're right. I think people like Jeff Bezos, I mean, a very strong example, Steve Jobs, the late Steve Jobs, and another very good example. And people tend to talk about these, there's a few individuals who do this really well, and they take inspiration from them, but then don't necessarily execute in the way they do. And as you said, these people, even though they're very, very senior at the head of the organization, they knew the business inside and out and were able to create clarity. That's absolutely crucial, and execute rigorously against that clarity, that made sure that everything from the top of the organization was lined up to the bottom. Now, there's a whole bunch, when you talk about the Portevo journey that I'm on, there's a whole bunch of things that are in there that you break it down into chunks of activity. It's that type of thing. You can then choose whether you're setting those as goals for internal people, or you are, work packaging them to an external resource supply. But that structured approach to how, what is important, and then how do you want to execute it, and then making sure that everyone's lined up around being able to execute it in that way. It sounds like it's quite a basic thing, but it's often, I've found that it's often missing. And you mentioned earlier on in terms of the bottom to the top in terms of how the message changes, and I think there's this. I heard the story, where people say, very at the lower levels, that people deem it to be a plan of manure. I won't swear on the podcast. And then by the time it gets to the senior levels, it's deemed to be a plan for growth. Do you know what I mean?
It's absolutely
because it's sort of massaged as it goes through the ranks. Because people add their own little bit to it. I've seen it so many times before where red all the way down in terms of the rag status, and then by the time it gets further up, it goes to amber, and then eventually it'll end up as green. Basically, so
they found some reason to change the color. There's something, But I think then but it's dangerous. I think if in terms of business success, because, and I think it comes down to culture. I think there are some businesses where they are truly radically open, and the truth is transmitted up and down, but I think they're in the minority. The vast majority, I think, is still a bit of a hangover. I don't know whether it's from being at school, and if you do something wrong and you're going to get told off, right? And so people find a way of adapting the story to protect them and those around them, rather than actually let's have a culture of true openness. We can identify where what's gone wrong, what the cause was, and how we do it differently, so that we're able to move forwards and be successful. And I think, like you mentioned, Steve Jobs, I think he was probably well renowned for his brutal honesty, but look where it got them, And I think the culture of that honesty flowed in multiple directions.
And I think my belief around this is I think you're right. It starts with the education system that we have. We condition people from a very early age that reward, if you like, and success is based on getting the right results, being effectively right all the time. We have systems that support all of that. People can then cram information and pass an exam and ultimately be sort of deemed to be very successful. But I think as we've probably learned as we've got older, I'm reading a book at the moment, the Mark Manson book, the subtle art of
not giving up.
Yeah, yeah. Bleep. One of the things that he talks about is the only way you learn is through failure, right? So and I know it's an overused cliche a lot of the time, that this idea that fail fast and everything else, but actually I do really believe it.
Yeah.
That you only get better at something by failing at it, because how would you ever get better?
Absolutely.
What's your benchmark for being good at something? So if you can't, but the society we live in says it recognizes and supports failure, but often people can be punished, be it directly, indirectly, in a passively aggressive way, sometimes openly, for failure. And I think I used to have this conversation, with people when I was sort of working in the corporate environment. My personal belief is I failed at a lot of things in my life, and I'm happy to admit that. But I'm a much stronger person for that now.
Absolutely.
And not only at a sort of humanistic level for myself personally, but just as a in terms of the knowledge that I have, because it like failure is painful, right? It can be, feels painful. But then drove me personally to go out there and find out more about things where maybe I was weak, and now I'm not so weak anymore. I'm still not at the destination, because I don't believe we ever get there.
No, you don't.
But I'm I think I am better, much stronger at those things, and feel much more credible and much more comfortable and all of those sorts of things. So I started taking risks that I never would have took before, like writing articles and things like that. Creating a blog, and I never would have taken those risks before, but the sense that you can just put yourself out there and be okay. I'm okay with being wrong. If somebody just disagrees with me, then say so. But
that's one of the scariest things, really, isn't it? Is doing something. I mean, we started this, and you're kind of putting yourself out there. We kind of have the benefit that we're talking to people like yourself, and I guess it's probably a little less daunting than just staring at a camera and talking stuff. I don't know how you ever get to the place where that feels comfortable. But I think you absolutely have to try and fail, and Steve will tell you the first few of these we've done, there's always been something that hasn't gone to plan, and you'd realize you need something else. It started off, we'll start a podcast, we'll get some microphones and a desk, and then we realized we needed to power it in a particular way, and then we had to get cameras. There's all sorts of stuff. There's just more and more learning, and I think unless you fail at something, like you say, I don't think you ever move forwards. You just, at best, you're going to stay the same. I think it and the other thing I think is to be comfortable with failure. You talked before about I do an awful lot of meditation these days, and it's been a life changer for me. But one of the things that I do during my meditation, every day in the morning, but it's like as part of my internal mantra sort of thing that I go through, is to recognize the stuff I'm not good at, and just like sort of almost there's a section in that where I just sort of can recognize who I am, but then also that I'm. And it's not about saying that I'm rubbish at something. These are areas where I'm not as strong as I want to be, or I have a behavioural characteristic I don't quite like. And it's not meant to be a self-critique. It's just acknowledging that it's there and not suppressing it, but just to let it out. And that can apply in a business context or in a human day-to-day life context as well. No, I think that's important. I think. Even going back to the book Think and Grow Rich, Napoleon Hill, there's a whole piece in there around self-inventory for that particular purpose. It's kind of a review of your own behaviors, your personality traits, your skills, because the whole idea being behind that is if you know yourself and you can be honest with yourself, you can do something about it. And actually, you mentioned it earlier on, if we were just more honest and more human in the business environment, life would be
so much better for people.
Yeah.
You know, there's so much nonsense that goes on in the environment. You know, that's just, you know, is politically charged. It's, you know, based on, you know, people's personal motivators and things like that. Whereas actually, as you know, when I get back, you know, just to the idea behind Portevo, which is, you know, this defined outcomes, outputs, statements of work, you know, let people do the stuff that they're good at, you know, and then rate them on that basis of can they get to that point. That's why, you know, there's a linkage there to me with things like mental well-being and everything else, because people can recognize that that they are able to do certain things, and you know, and they have strengths in a certain way. And because a lot of the time, you know, the things that I think, you know, can have an adverse impact on people in those types of environments is not the type of work that they do, or the skills or capabilities that they need to have. Because if we got those, you know, it's everything else that goes with it. And I think if we can find a way to, you know, point people at the, you know, the ability to provide, you know, a service within the, you know, that environment, then I think it's a different context altogether.
Yeah, I agree. I think you could then, if you were the leadership within a business, and you could say, right, we've got these particular tasks that need doing, we need somebody who's good at X and somebody that's good at Y. You can effectively cherry pick people for individual skills for individual tasks, whereas I think the current model is very much a, you know, chuck a basket of things into a job description and hope that you find somebody where some of it sticks. And ultimately, I think you end up with people doing maybe, even, you know, if they're lucky, 20-30% of their job that they really don't enjoy at all. But in most cases, I'd say it's probably a higher percentage of that.
Very lucky if it's
I think you end up doing a whole load of tasks that you don't really enjoy doing, and it's, but you speak to other people that, you know, for me, I'm more of a higher level strategic-y type thinking person, and I prefer to be in the conversation trying to solve the problem. I'm not so keen when it comes down to the right now, let's do the doing section of it. But then there's loads of people that really love getting in, and so if you can find people to complement your skill set, I think you can go a really long way.
Well, that's it, isn't it? You try and build a team. If you're working in a team like that, you're trying to build a team with sort of varying competencies and recognizing where those different things are. But that's the other thing about Portevo, again, in the sort of longer run. You know, when people think about, you know, assessments or psychometric profile, and they probably think, oh, you know, it's something that's meant to catch me out. It's you know, my own experiences with this type of thing haven't always been great. You know, it's sort of, I've typically found that rather than being used for you, they're sort of more used against you. And, you know, people, you know, they obviously use a lot in recruitment, but generally as more of a reductive thing. Whereas, you know, I'd like to be able to find a way to use this type of sort of, you know, psychometric profile to be a strength finder. So you know, you flip it on its head, so you can then, you know, give the power to the person, you know, the associate, you know, or the consultant, you know, to understand, you know, the types of work that they could be good at, or the types of statements of work they could be good at. Some of those things they might know, or they might believe that they know. There could be a whole raft of other things that they could be good at that they maybe never have practiced. That you can open up that world for them. And, you know, again, I'm sort of talking in the longer term, but it's then to have, you know, on the network is to have people who could coach them in some of those things. So if they've got the, you know, the right profile to do that sort of statement of work, but have never done it before, but let's say you had done it, then, you know, perhaps you could coach them. And then, you know, the idea being that if I'm working in this way, I have access to a broader range of opportunity. I have access to development opportunity, and then everybody benefits from the network effect. And not only does not only do the people, you know, on the network in terms of the consultants benefit, but so does the business side, the buy side, because they get better quality and higher quality. And I you know, my feeling around it is that there's a way to change the way people look at work, and to change the way people engage with work, to give people more freedom, more empowerment, you know, more flexibility. I mean, I was talking with the gent who's doing some of the brand work for me at the moment for it. And, we look at sort of demographics within society who can often be marginalised unfairly, a working mum who, wants to return back from work after maternity leave. Can often find, that, despite the diversity and inclusion things within a corporate environment, their career becomes a little bit stilted because they have different choices and different priorities. Well, that's not fair. And actually, if they could work much more flexibly and they weren't, presenteeism wasn't the thing that was important, then, and it was based on outcomes and outputs, then there's a great opportunity. People from the, classified and registered as disabled, who maybe aren't as mobile as other people in some cases, or don't want to or can't, work within a corporate environment, but they're very, very highly skilled at something. Can we open up the business landscape for them by making sure they don't have to travel to these places, but actually can offer their skills in a more remote way? And as I can go on, the list goes on, but my feeling is there's an awful lot of talent that exists out there not only in the UK, but across the world, that doesn't get access to some of these projects. And also, I think there's an awful lot of business who don't have access to the full market. Yeah. And I think that somehow needs to change.
Yeah, I think I having worked in a couple of organisations now, on a kind of a national role, one of the things I see, and I see a huge frustration is, some very talented people who are maybe living in Scotland or in the north of England or something, and maybe they've come up through a sales role and they want to progress into a different area, go into a more proposition maybe role or some kind of other centralized function, but unless they're willing to move to the southeast of England, there's not really any opportunity to do that. And I think something like Portevo will actually open up opportunities for people like that to move into and progress their careers and not get stuck in a field sales role, for example, because hey, that's the only way they're going to make a certain level of income without moving down to London or the surrounding area where the big organisations are based.
Exactly. I'm an economic migrant myself. I'm from the northeast of England. I saw the 20 odd years ago, but I saw that the only way for me to build a successful career was to move to London. Now I've had a great life in doing that. I met my wife and I've children. I've settled in the southeast of England. I'm very happy with that. But that's not for everybody, and not everybody wants to do that, and they shouldn't be forced to do that to enjoy a successful and fulfilling career. I think I was talking with a friend of mine as well recently who his brother studied economics. He worked for, I think, one of the large American banks for a while. Very, very strong economist, but also suffered with sort of acute anxiety as well, and used to struggle within the working environment. So he long story short, he's now a truck driver. Who's a talented economist, but doesn't feel like he can sort of spend time in the corporate environment because he simply doesn't feel like he can work in that way. But could actually in a portfolio context and in a Portevo context still apply his capability to business problems, just not in the traditional way. So that's a loss of key capability in that particular area for our economy. And I'm sure that story is repeated hundreds, thousands, I don't know, millions of times potentially.
Definitely
across our land.
Definitely. The other thing you just touched on there, I think, is something I'm really interested in. Is a portfolio style career and giving the ability to effectively have multiple streams of income rather than relying on the one. And I think never has it been made more acute than a time like now, where that one stream of income is drying up very, very quickly. And I think we need to start with, it starts with education again, I think, to start looking at how do people really think about having multiple streams. But even now with people already in the workplace, it's starting to open up the possibility of people going down that route without needing to be at sea level or something.
Yeah, and I think it creates I mean, there's a number of big shifts that are required, but because people associate permanent employment with security, because that's how it used to be in generations previous to us, and perhaps there is a bit more security if you're in a permanent role, but as we're even seeing now, a lot of companies generally are running on pretty low cash reserves. And something, I mean, this is an unprecedented scenario we'll find ourselves in, but something like this happens and the businesses collapse, basically. So they find themselves in the situation where they didn't have, as you say, it's dried up, and not through no fault of their own.
Yeah.
But with having the ability where, yes, you could potentially work much more flexibly for, more than one business, for more than one industry, perhaps in that situation, well, at the consultant side, the businesses that they're working for, yes, some of them might struggle, but then other ones, may not, and therefore they've got, they could create a, even if there's a ramp down in the stream of income, perhaps during certain situations. It doesn't happen for every industry, but at the business side as well, they're carrying an awful lot less fixed cost through this model, because they haven't got all of the low productivity, high, levels of inadvertent wastage, but it is wastage. So they have a healthier P&L, healthier margins, because what they're then doing is they're then dialing up and down their resource as and when they need it. And people would say, well, does that not mean there's less work for people? I don't think so. No, I think that this idea that you have access to more business, more opportunities, more business across the whole stream of size, and I think it democratizes the whole market and actually makes it's not something that will happen overnight, but it will over a period of years. It could look, the way we work and we interact with work could look very, very differently, and I think that that's really exciting for everybody involved.
Yeah. Actually. And I think it means that businesses will have to work really hard to attract the good people, right? It's going to be a competitive market, and that puts a bit more power into the hands of the people doing the work. You don't have that kind of monopoly, really, of once you've got an employee through the door. Well, you kind of got them there, haven't you? And then how you treat them after that point and all the rest of it is kind of irrelevant to a degree, because lots of people don't leave really, really miserable jobs because of the perceived fear and the hassle of doing so, right? But if you live more in a gig economy style, then well, the good companies are going to have to do something if they want to get the good talent. Otherwise, they're really going to get left behind.
Well, I think you're right. I think it's a big paradigm shift, and I think you will see. I mean, I wrote an article on LinkedIn recently about it, but I think you'll see a shrinking of the corporate structure, because businesses actually need P&L and sort of margin perspective. But I think with that shift, then you'll also see a transference of some of the power to the people actually doing the work. To your point there, and it's not about wielding that power. I just think it will empower different people within that system. Yeah, and just it will change the dynamic of how the people doing the work interact with the people who need the work done. And it doesn't mean that you'll see a disappearance, I don't think, of the corporate structure. I think there'll still be massive companies providing massive services, to people in the same way, but the way that they resource those services, could be done in a different way. And then, as I said there, the people supplying the resource to do those services can be supplying those same resources to a bunch of other different enterprises as well at the same time. And, the one thing we sort of touched on earlier on is this idea that people, why do we need to work a 40-hour week? Why do you need to work a 60-hour week? Why is the hours important?
Yeah. I know.
We never ask ourselves that question. Like, why is that?
Why? Yeah. Why? It's arbitrary, Monday to Friday, fill the week. And I don't know whether you've ever seen that. There's a psychological experiment where the waiting room experiment, where it's like a dentist or a doctor's waiting room or something, and there's a few people in the waiting room, and a new person comes in, and the people that are already in there are actors effectively, and this person comes in and there's a beep that goes off periodically, and every time there's a beep, everyone stands up, And so the new person comes in and looks funny and doesn't do it for the first couple, but because everyone's doing it, they start to do it. And then one by one, the actors leave because they get called through and new people come in. And the new people, when you get to the point where there's no original people there and everyone's doing this standing up on the beat,
doing this
because it's just what they would do, everyone else was doing when they got there.
It's just like passing the baton on, isn't it? It's like this, like the sort of adverse and slightly perverse side of like, you know, this like almost osmosis, like leadership by osmosis, where, you know, somebody's asking you why you're doing something, you just go, well, everyone else was doing it, so I'm doing it. And I honestly think, because if you know, it was part of the new business, I was looking at key insights around the second industrial revolution and what created the 9-to-5 working model, and you know, it was all around the protection of workers and, you know, protect us from, you know, from themselves actually, but also from, you know, the abuse of factory owners and things like that. But, you know, over 150 years ago, you know, probably more than that now. And we live in the digital age where we've got, you know, more opportunities for connectivity than we've ever had before, and we're still working in that way.
Yeah,
it's very, very strange.
It is. It's funny. The other day somebody asked me and said, because, you know, it's been a while since I've been in the corporate world and I've been doing this and various other things, and they said, is there a difference between a weekend and a weekday? And I said, not really now, to be honest, because I work when I've got stuff to do and when I want it, and suddenly when something strikes me, and I might work flat out for 10 or 12 hours, and then the next day I might go cycling and I'll do a little bit less, but it kind of ebbs and flows a bit more naturally now, and I feel more fulfilled on it, you know, generally as a result of doing that.
Yeah. Well, I think that goes back to the point on empowerment, because, you know, it's not, this isn't, you know, again, one of the things that I've observed when I've worked with people, you know, when I was doing some work at 3 and we were looking at how we could, you know, improve things like flexible working and improve the adoption of flexible working. And the thing that always comes up, you know, is this idea that, and this is not unique to all businesses, or a lot of businesses are the same, but it comes up that, you know, this idea that people, there's a lack of trust, if we just sort of put it out there, that if I can't see you, then perhaps I don't, you know, feel that you're doing your work, and also there's you know, that comes in from the employee side as well, that, you know, people feel like they won't trust me, so then I've got to do more and more. Whereas, you know, as you said there, you know, and I'm finding this myself, you know, sometimes I work, you know, really hard, you know, for a long period of time, but then yes, I'll take some breaks, or I'll go down the gym, you know, in the morning, or I'll, you know, I'm not confined to a schedule that is you know, that's so rigorous in that sense, and that can feel quite empowering, you know, if you can scale that model for everybody, you know, and people put some sensible controls around it, then, you know, within that model, then they might decide, you know, that they want to take a 3-month you know, break from it all, and you know, just take some time out, and then be able to plug back in, you know, into a network where they can, you know, they can get the work, you know, as they were before. And I sort of, the feeling I have is you just end up with a whole raft of, like, on mass scale, more motivated people. And if you think about, you know, the current time, sort of accepted, but like sort of the post-Brexit landscape, you know, when we need to level up the UK, as the Prime Minister says, and we need to, you know, drive innovation, and we need to, you know, create new wealth in the economy. But to me, you know, that all comes from the people we have, and therefore to, you know, to make sure that as much opportunity is available for people to, you know, and to work in a way that's flexible for them and that meets their lifestyle needs. That's how you unlock, you know, significant opportunity.
And how do you, obviously there's the kind of tax reform, the famous IR35 has now been deferred for 12 months. How does that work with this kind of model? Is, you know, do you think, well, firstly, I guess the question is, do you think that'll end up being reviewed now there's another year with a lot of pressure on it, over the course of next year, as to whether that will be actually implemented or not?
I honestly don't know whether it'll be implemented or not. Obviously, yes, and I think the deferral is a sensible thing. Personally, I think the way that a lot of companies reacted to it was a sledgehammer cracking a nut. But also, I think it is fair to say that for a lot of contractors, sort of freelance type people who had been working in the same organisations in some cases for 5 years, some cases 10 years,
yeah.
To break that's not freelance work, and that's not working at risk. It's so I could understand why the government looked at it in a way that says, well, you're pretty much a permanent employee if you're going to be there 9 to 5 and you're working for somebody and you have budget responsibility, and but you then exercising your revenue through a more efficient sort of tax model that's designed for reinvestment in business and all of that sort of stuff. So I sort of I wouldn't say if I agree or disagree with it, but I sort of understand why they looked at it. I mean, in this particular context, the way that I would see it is, it's a this model becomes a way of working. It's not designed at all to get around IR35. It's designed actually to give people style careers where they're working for potentially sort of 2 or 3 or 4 clients at any one time, and rather than working on a time and materials basis, they are providing their capability as a service to an organization, which is more of a typical consulting style model.
One of the things when you were just talking about the psychometric stuff, and I mentioned earlier Ray Dalio, I'm reading his book at the moment called Principles, and one of the things that they really worked on within Bridgewater Associates was understanding what people's strengths were and hiring specifically for strengths within a particular area. And they went so far, I mean, they used I can't remember, 4 or 5 different psychometric profilings. Myers-Briggs was one of them. There's quite a few others. And they ended up creating baseball cards effectively for each individual, which had their strengths and weaknesses listed on each of them, so that everybody knew when they were putting a project together or a piece of work needed to happen, who the right people were to get onto the team. And it's quite interesting. Obviously when that first came out, there was some resistance to it, and people were quite nervous about having their weaknesses written on a card effectively. But it seems to have been adopted over the last couple of decades or something very effectively, and actually was one of the things they put their success down to, is it's purely around putting people with strengths into roles that they're good at, rather than just trying to get people, just fill roles and end up with people that aren't fulfilled and aren't happy.
I think as I said earlier on, my experiences with that type of profile, and generally speaking, hasn't always been that positive, and it hasn't always been that positive because it was more reductive. So it was too much more on the you're not that sort of person, or you're not this type of person. And actually, there's an awful lot of context around those types of assessments. But the other thing is, as well as, yes, actually, what you should be really looking at is your areas of strength are all of these things. And actually, yes, there's areas of development that can bring you to that point. So I think a lot of people are probably rightly so, a little bit circumspect around them. But as you say there, if it's a strength finder philosophy, then it doesn't need to be. This is about the idea that I would have is to make sure that it becomes a useful matching exercise that says, I'm this individual, I have these, strengths and areas, that I'm where my larger preferences would be, and actually this is the type of work across these different areas that I'd be very, very good at, and I can build a fulfilling career. Because I suppose the other thing around, linking to the Portevo concept is we often do these profile and assessments within the work environment, within the corporate construct, when we're within a job already, and all of a sudden we do an assessment that tells us perhaps we don't have some of the criteria that job then now requires. So all of a sudden you feel
looking over your shoulder.
This sort of like threatened sort of response, occurs because we're in this sort of survival mode of then trying to prove that we could do those things. Whereas if actually that didn't matter to me because there was a stream of, demand and need coming from elsewhere within sort of various domains that that where my strengths were, then I'd probably be less concerned about that. And then the other sort of consequences or benefits that come from that, would be much more, present.
And so, what stage are you currently at with the project now?
So we're only, a couple of months in. I've got I recently applied for I'm not sure if the timing's now bad, but a government innovation grant as well, to fund a proof of concept in some of the technology, and I'll find out about that, I think, around the July time frame. I'm also in the process of getting some introductions to venture capitalists. In the shorter term, it really is around building a small but sort of well-formed associate network, whereby we can go out and win some new clients and business, probably more in the context of a team of sort of ex-industry professionals who are now working as consultants, but do it on that statement of work basis. So we'll structure the engagement, we'll sort of define our approach, we'll show how we'll do it, and then agree a price, and then crack on that basis. So yes, we've got a sort of 5 to 7 year vision, which is quite grand, and wanting to make a much bigger impact on the world of work. But we're a sort of very small startup at the moment, and aiming to build some credibility over the next probably 6-12 months, whilst in parallel working on some technology that can enable the marketplace effect, if you like, that we've been talking about on this during this podcast.
Yep. And are you looking for people to get in contact if they've got if they're interested in getting involved with the project?
Yeah, I would love that. If people want to reach out and they have either a different level of contribution to make, or both in terms of knowledge and expertise, any advice, but also if there's somebody who's out there and they're sitting on a bit of capital, who wants to have that conversation, and sees this as an opportunity to invest in something that has the opportunity to be something big and meaningful for the future, then yeah, absolutely, that would be very open to having that conversation as well.
And what's the best way for them to get in contact with you? Via the website? Yeah,
via the website, or via my LinkedIn profile as well, and maybe just connect with me on there, and we could set up a video conference and talk on that basis.
It's been great talking to you.
Very good. Indeed. And
like I said, we'll make sure we put links to make sure so that people can get in contact with you.
Sounds great. Yeah, I'd love that. So yeah, it's been a pleasure.
Great stuff.
All right.
Cheers, Danny. Have a good evening. Thank you.
Cheers.
Bye.
Bye.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Pocket Mastermind podcast. If you'd like to hear more, head over to pocketmastermind.com. And if you'd like to learn more about Danny and Portevo, head over to Portevo.work. Until next time, thank you very much for listening. We'd really appreciate it if you'd like, share and follow our content so that we can reach more people.